Forget what you've heard on the mainstream news. The real story of the chaos ripping through the American oil market right now isn't just about barrel prices or faraway conflicts. It's about a secret meeting, a shocking rejection, and a high-stakes political gamble that is about to affect every single American. The world is staring at oil prices smashing through the $100 barrier. Global trade is paralyzed by a conflict that has slammed shut the most critical oil artery on the planet. And right at this moment of maximum crisis, a lifeline that could have stabilized the U.S. economy, a lifeline offered by America's closest ally, has just been cut. The headlines are screaming that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney gave President Trump a big no on reviving the Keystone XL pipeline. But those headlines don't tell you the half of it. They don't tell you why. He said no, what he demanded in return, and how this single diplomatic failure is pouring gasoline on an economic fire that is already burning out of control. We are going to break down what truly happened behind the closed doors of the White House. We will uncover the real story they are not telling you, a story of geopolitical hardball colliding with a military crisis that has sent the global energy market into a death spiral. This is much bigger than a pipeline. This is about a fundamental shift in the global order, and it's happening right now. To understand the sheer gravity of the situation, you first have to understand the chaos that has been unleashed in the Persian Gulf. As of today, the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which nearly a fifth of the entire world's daily oil supply passes, is effectively a war zone. It's been shut down since February 28, 2026, following joint military strikes by the United States and Israel against Iran. This wasn't just a minor skirmish. The operation was massive, and it resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The response from Tehran was immediate and furious. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, launched a barrage of missile and drone attacks on U.S. military bases, on Israel, and on other Gulf states. And they delivered a terrifying ultimatum to the world. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. An IRGC commander publicly threatened to set ablaze any vessel that dared to attempt passage. They weren't bluffing. In the days that followed, chaos reigned. At least 8 commercial vessels were struck by projectiles and drones. A tanker was hit, injuring crew members. Another caught fire. The message was received loud and clear. Global shipping has come to a screeching halt. Right now, there are over 150 tankers anchored in the waters outside the strait, afraid to move. They are sitting ducks in a floating parking lot, holding millions upon millions of barrels of oil that the world desperately needs. Major carriers like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd have suspended all transits through the region. For a global economy that runs on oil, this is the equivalent of a sudden, massive heart attack. The largest disruption to energy supply since the 1970s crisis is underway. The economic fallout has been brutal and swift. Brent crude, the international benchmark, skyrocketed. It blew past $100 a barrel for the first time in years, peaking at over $120. As of this morning, March 13th, it is hovering around $141, a staggering increase over the last month. Analysts are warning that if the strait remains closed, we could see even higher prices. President Trump has responded with a typically hardline stance, vowing to escalate strikes and largely dismissing the inflationary risks back home. The administration has floated ideas like tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and has announced a release. But these are temporary fixes to a potentially permanent problem. The U.S. military says it has already struck thousands of targets in Iran and warned civilians to stay away from ports where the Iranian military is operating. But here's the terrifying reality. Even with the U.S. Navy offering to escort tankers, shippers are refusing to take the risk. The threat is too high, the insurance is astronomical, and no one wants their vessel to be the next headline. This isn't a problem that can be solved with a few warships. This is a fundamental breakdown of global energy security. And it's in the middle of this perfect storm, with America's energy supply under unprecedented threat, that the Keystone XL pipeline went from being a political football to an economic necessity, a lifeline, a deal that should have been the easiest win of the year. Instead, it all came crashing down. What the public saw was a simple headline: Carney says no. What sources in Washington and Ottawa are describing is a far more complex and high-stakes negotiation that went disastrously wrong. This wasn't a simple rejection. It was a calculated act of economic brinkmanship from America's northern neighbor at a moment of extreme vulnerability. To understand what happened, we need to go back to a pivotal closed-door meeting in October 2025. Newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former governor of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, came to the White House. On the surface, it was a standard introductory visit. Behind the scenes, Carney came with a bombshell proposal. Reports from sources briefed on the discussions confirm that Carney himself raised the prospect of reviving the Keystone XL pipeline with President Trump. This wasn't some half-baked idea. Carney knew exactly what he was offering. He was aware that a company called South Bow, which was spun off from TC Energy, was already exploring a revival of the project. The plan was clever. Instead of the original controversial route, this new Keystone XL would be a modified version. It would transport around 550,000 barrels of crude oil per day from Alberta across the border and connect to hubs in the United States. Critically, the proposal from South Bow's U.S. partner, Bridger Pipeline, involved building the new segments alongside existing pipeline infrastructure, a move designed to fast-track the permitting process that had plagued the project for years. On the Canadian side, the permits were still valid, with President Trump in the White House, who had revived the project once before and publicly posted about his desire to see it built. This should have been a slam dunk. So when Prime Minister Carney walked into the Oval Office and put the Keystone XL revival on the table, President Trump was reportedly very receptive. The two leaders reportedly directed their teams to immediately pursue discussions. So what went wrong? Why are we now talking about chaos and rejection? Because Keystone XL wasn't a gift. It was leverage. For months, the Trump administration had been hammering Canadian industries with punishing tariffs. Using national security as a justification, Trump had slapped tariffs of up to 50% on Canadian steel and aluminum and 25% on automobiles. These weren't minor annoyances. They were crippling Canadian businesses and straining the famously friendly U.S.-Canada relationship. Prime Minister Carney was under immense pressure back home to get these tariffs lifted. And so, he made his move. Sources confirm that Carney explicitly linked the Keystone XL revival to a deal on tariffs. The pitch wasn't just, let's build a pipeline. The pitch was, let's build a pipeline, and in return, you will provide relief for our steel, aluminum, and auto sectors. This is the big no that the headlines are screaming about, but they've got the story backward. It wasn't Carney rejecting Trump's pipeline. It was Carney rejecting the idea that Canada would solve America's self-inflicted energy crisis for free. The no was a refusal to proceed without a reciprocal deal on tariffs. It was a bold strategic gamble. Carney was betting that America's need for stable, friendly oil would outweigh Trump's protectionist trade agenda. In normal times, it might have been a protracted negotiation, but these are not normal times. Just 4 months after that meeting, the world changed. The Strait of Hormuz closed, and Carney's gamble suddenly became a critical test of President Trump's priorities. Is it more important to win a trade war with an ally or to secure America's energy future in the face of a global crisis? The stalemate that followed is the hidden story behind the current chaos. A solution is sitting right there on the table: 550,000 barrels a day of reliable crude from a stable democracy. An increase of over 12% in Canadian exports to the U.S., ready to be fast-tracked. South Bow has even started a formal open season to solicit commitments from shippers, a clear sign the industry is ready to move. But the entire project is frozen, held hostage by a diplomatic standoff over tariffs on steel. The standoff between Carney and Trump is a perfect storm of political ego, economic necessity, and geopolitical crisis. On one side, you have a U.S. president who has built his political brand on being a tough negotiator who never backs down, especially on tariffs. On the other, a Canadian prime minister who cannot be seen to cave to American pressure without getting something substantial in return for his country's key industries. Let's break down the impossible positions both leaders find themselves in. For President Trump, the equation is excruciating. The crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is a direct threat to his presidency. Spiking gasoline prices and rampant inflation are political poison, especially in an environment of economic uncertainty. He needs a win. He needs to show the American people he has a plan to bring down prices and secure the nation's energy supply. The revived Keystone XL is the perfect solution. It's supported by industry, and it comes from a friendly neighbor, not a volatile petrostate halfway across the world. Approving it would look decisive. But to get it, he has to give in to Carney's demands on tariffs. He would have to roll back the very tariffs he has championed as essential for protecting American jobs. This would be framed by his opponents as caving to a foreign leader. For a president who prides himself on America first, it's a bitter pill to swallow. He is caught between a rock and a hard place. Risk looking weak to his base by lifting tariffs, or risk letting an energy crisis spiral out of control. For Prime Minister Carney, the calculation is just as fraught. He offered the pipeline as a carrot. He can't now simply give it away. The Canadian steel, aluminum, and auto industries have been battered by these U.S. tariffs. If he agrees to the pipeline without securing tariff relief, he will be accused of selling out Canadian workers just to help the Americans. He would face a political firestorm at home. As one former Canadian ambassador to the U.S. noted, this is also a domestic political issue for Carney, particularly with the oil-rich province of Alberta. The pipeline is a huge priority for them, and Carney can use that to push for other national objectives. He holds a strong hand, and he knows it. The Canadian strategy is out in the open, so we are in a state of paralysis. Two leaders, two national interests, locked in a stalemate while the global economy burns. And this deadlock doesn't exist in a vacuum. The Keystone XL revival, even if agreed to tomorrow, faces a mountain of other challenges. Analysts point out that the political risk is enormous. A future Democratic administration could simply revoke the presidential permit on day one, just as President Biden did in 2021, killing the project for a third time. Investors are wary of pouring billions into a project that could be canceled with the stroke of a pen. Then there's the competition. Other pipeline operators, like Enbridge, are also expanding their capacity, and the Trans Mountain Pipeline to Canada's west coast offers an alternative route to Asian markets. South Bow and Bridger would need to prove their project is not just politically viable, but economically superior. The proposed pipeline route to Guernsey, Wyoming, is also not a final destination for crude. It would require building additional links to get the oil to major refining hubs like Cushing, Oklahoma, or the Gulf Coast, adding more layers of complexity, cost, and potential delays. This intricate web of political posturing, economic calculation, and logistical hurdles is the reality behind the simplistic headlines. There is no easy yes or no. There is only a series of incredibly difficult choices. While Washington and Ottawa are locked in their stare down, the clock is ticking. Oil tankers are sitting idle in the Gulf, and the price at the pump for every American continues to climb. The world is changing faster than ever. Geopolitical conflicts, secret negotiations, and economic warfare are no longer abstract concepts. They have a direct impact on your wallet, your security, and your future. The mainstream media often gives you the headline, but they miss the real story happening behind the scenes. If you want to understand the moves these leaders are making before everyone else reports on them and what it means for you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We connect the dots that others don't even see. The consequences of this diplomatic failure are not abstract. They are real, and they are hitting the American economy right now, creating a ripple effect that starts in the Persian Gulf, crashes against a wall of political obstinacy in Washington and Ottawa and lands directly in the wallets of ordinary Americans. The most immediate and painful impact is at the gas pump. With the Strait of Hormuz shut down and a fifth of global oil supply suddenly choked off, the price of crude has surged. That translates directly to higher gasoline prices. We are already seeing the effects, and they are only going to get worse the longer this crisis continues. The forecast of oil staying well above 90 BBL means no relief in sight for American drivers. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a tax on every family, every commuter, and every business that relies on transportation. But it goes far beyond that. The price of oil is baked into the cost of almost everything we buy. From plastics to the fertilizer used to grow our food, higher energy costs mean higher production costs. Those costs are inevitably passed on to consumers. The inflation that we are already feeling is being supercharged by this energy crisis. Your grocery bill will go up. The cost of shipping every product to every store will go up. The cost of heating your home will go up. President Trump has dismissed these inflation risks, stating that neutralizing Iran is more important than the cost of oil. But for millions of American households, rising costs are not a geopolitical abstraction. They are a clear and present danger to their financial stability. The stock market is flashing warning signs. The initial shock of the Hormuz closure sent markets tumbling. While there have been attempts to rally, the sustained high energy prices and the enormous geopolitical uncertainty are creating extreme volatility. Investors hate uncertainty, and right now the global economic picture is more uncertain than it has been in decades. A prolonged energy crisis could easily tip the U.S. economy into a recession. Companies faced with higher energy and transportation costs may pull back on hiring and investment. Your 401k and your job security are now directly linked to the outcome of this conflict and the stalemate over Keystone XL. Furthermore, this crisis is exposing a dangerous strategic vulnerability for the United States. For years, America has been the dominant power in the Middle East, the implicit guarantor of security for the flow of oil. That image is now shattered. Not only has Iran successfully closed the Strait of Hormuz, but America's traditional allies in the region are watching with growing alarm. Reports indicate that Gulf nations, feeling exposed and questioning the reliability of U.S. security guarantees, are already beginning to pivot towards new alliances. This represents a seismic geopolitical shift, a long-term erosion of American influence that will have consequences for decades to come. This is why the failure of the Carney-Trump talks is so catastrophic. The Keystone XL pipeline was never just about oil. It was about energy security. It was about strengthening the North American economic bloc against global volatility. By providing a stable, reliable source of crude from a trusted ally, the pipeline would have acted as a powerful hedge against the exact kind of crisis we are now facing. It would have insulated the U.S. economy, at least partially, from the chaos of the Middle East. It would have sent a powerful message to the world that North America is an energy fortress. Instead, at the moment of maximum peril, the fortress gates remain closed because of a dispute over steel tariffs. The very definition of failing to see the forest for the trees. The chaos that has erupted in the U.S. isn't just because of Iran. It's because of a political failure to secure a vital economic lifeline when it was needed most. The story of Mark Carney, Donald Trump, and the Keystone XL pipeline is the story of a monumental missed opportunity. It's a narrative that the headlines have twisted, focusing on a simple no while ignoring the complex reality of what was truly at stake. The chaos we are seeing in the U.S. oil markets was triggered by a war in the Persian Gulf, but it is being amplified by a diplomatic breakdown right here in North America. The big no wasn't Carney rejecting a pipeline. It was Carney rejecting Trump's trade war. It was a demand for partnership at a time when the White House was focused on economic confrontation. The result is a stalemate, a paralysis that prevents an obvious solution from being implemented while the American economy teeters on the brink. We are left with a series of terrifying questions. How long can the Strait of Hormuz remain closed before the global economy breaks? Will the price of oil push past $120 a barrel and trigger a deep, painful recession? And most critically, what is the next move on the chessboard between Washington and Ottawa? Will President Trump decide that lower gas prices are more important than winning a tariff fight and accept Carney's terms? Or will he double down, trying to pressure Canada into submission while the crisis deepens? Conversely, will Prime Minister Carney, seeing the damage to the global economy, decide that proceeding with the pipeline is a necessary act of statesmanship, even without a victory on tariffs? The fates of two nations, and in many ways the stability of the global economy, hang on the answer to these questions. One thing is certain. A deal that seemed like a simple economic proposition just a few months ago has now become one of the most consequential diplomatic challenges of our time. A lifeline is waiting, but someone has to be willing to grab it. Who do you think has more leverage here, Trump or Carney? And who will blink first? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.